Hi, everybody, and welcome to the June 4th edition of Maximum Growth Live. I am Jay Ruane with my good friend over here, Seth Price. Seth, how are you doing this week?
It's on the upswing. We have the emotional roller coaster, but I feel like business is coming back. We have PPP possibly extended to make it easier to spend, less fires to put out and more focusing on the future.
Yeah, that's one of the interesting things that I think is going on. People are starting to, it was a big dip, man. It was a big dip, and now as we're starting to build out, you're starting to get an idea of where you can see your growth over the next year or 2 years. You're starting to see what your new normal, next normal, whatever normal you want to call it, is going to be, and obviously it's going to be a change from what it was, 4 or 5 months ago. And I think there's now the opportunity for business-minded law firm owners to really sort of get in, reestablish themselves, reset, and be able to go forward. And that's actually something that I wanted to talk to you a little bit about. We've talked a little bit over the last couple of weeks about lawyers who are adding new verticals, and that's one way to grow your firm. And you're somebody who's done it a lot of different ways. So I want to talk to you a little bit about that, about the idea of growth, and what's your take on it? Is it better, or is there a better way to add growth to your firm by doing it through promoting from within, like finding a good lawyer in your office who wants to add a vertical or grow a new vertical, or is it better to try to acquire an existing vertical? There's a lot of senior lawyers now that are looking to downsize and may want to join a firm and use their knowledge and skill. Where do you see the best tactical moves to grow your firm in terms of a new vertical?
Right. And I think better is a loaded term. I think it's what's better for you and what your comfort level is and where you are and what bandwidth you have. If somebody has the bandwidth to open a new vertical, understand it, and leverage junior labor, there's nothing more profitable than that, in the sense that you can leverage junior labor against revenue, and that's awesome. Or a senior person. But to me, the issue becomes it's always quality control. And I don't love the idea of putting something in place unless either I know it, which I likely won't if it's a new area, or I want to bring somebody in senior enough that the buck stops with them on substance, because there won't be anybody to oversee them realistically. And you can kid yourself and say, oh, I'm taking on X area of law and I'm going to oversee that. But if you don't really know it yourself, then you're sort of supervising somebody who doesn't know what they're doing, and you don't really know what you're doing. That to me is a bad idea. So for me, what I've always looked at is to bring somebody in who is senior enough, like the ideal being that somebody who's worked under somebody for a period of time and is ready to rise out on their own. I like the idea of putting them on a pedestal as that, partner, non-equity partner, contract partner, whatever you want to call it, in charge of a practice group so they can build that vertical under your umbrella. But at the same time, you're not taking the risk of not knowing that the clients are going to be taken care of because somebody understands that area of law inside and out.
Another thing that just came to me, and I want to get your opinion on this, is that the fact that, the PPP money may be extended now 24 weeks really could give some law firms and some law firm owners a great opportunity to bring somebody in a consultant role if they want to get into a new area. So you're not committed necessarily to having them as a full-time employee that is going to be with you for a long time. But you can bring somebody who's exiting their own practice and just have them consult, so they can sort of oversee as you start to ramp up. And I guess that really comes down to the life cycle and lifespan of the caseload, because if you're going to bring somebody in for 6 months, but it's a med mal case that's going to take 3 years to litigate, you're not going to have them for when the rubber hits the road. But for some other
Right.
practice areas, I can see that as being a profitable way and a wise business way to sort of have a third component. Like, you're not hiring from within. You're not bringing in somebody at the high ticket rate that they might want as a contract partner in that area, but you're hiring them as a consultant, and that could be a third way to do it. Have you ever done that?
I've never gone the contract route. I believe in sort of the of counsel route. Bring somebody in who can share their knowledge, get a percentage of cases. And that's how I've rolled out a number of our verticals. And we talked over the years about this, the idea that somebody comes in when you don't have leverage or knowledge, you can pay a higher percentage. But once Jay works his magic and the cases are coming in, then you're able to sort of bring in attorney labor to work those cases. And that once that's the case, you can get to a percentage that makes money for them and for the house. Generally, the amount that you would have to pay an of counsel who has an established book of business, who knows an area, would be higher than what would allow you to make a viable profit margin. So that, I look at that as sort of a transition stage, bring somebody in. I don't want to say overpaying, but allowing somebody to have a larger percentage based on their knowledge of the space, and then use that to pyramid other people who eventually would then have the experience themselves.
Yeah, that's certainly a smart way to approach it. One of the things that I think is going to be a challenge for any lawyer or law firm that's deciding to add on a new practice area or new vertical in order to sort of deal with the losses that they've gotten this year. And boy, I looked at my numbers, my first quarter versus where we are so far in the second quarter. It's heartbreaking to see the cliff that we fell off of. But one of the things about hiring somebody like you're talking about is that they can actually help with the intake process, right? Because they know how to size up a case, early on in the process that you might not have those skills.
Right. You don't know anything about that, and that's where it gets dangerous, because when you look at areas like family law and immigration, where there's historically been a charge for the consultation, very different than the criminal world you're playing in primarily, where you're basically looking at a free consultation because everybody needs a lawyer. The question is, will they pay for one? Whereas in other areas where it's discretionary, there's not a court date coming, people will drag things out. So that intake itself, the philosophy behind it, needs to be morphed and driven by somebody who understands the monetization of the widget in the end.
Yeah, and I think that brings us to our guest today, Gary Falkowitz, who's going to talk with us about identifying the problems in the intake system, right? Because it's important, if you're going to be bringing on a new vertical, if you're going to be growing your firm, to really sort of start with your fundamentals and get your intake right, because you can wind up with a ton of cases that eat up a ton of time and a ton of resources and provide nothing in terms of revenue. If you're taking on cases that other lawyers have passed on because you're not so knowledgeable in that area. And I think that's something that anybody who's looking to grow needs to. You see the phone start ringing. You're like, yeah, I'll take it. But that may not necessarily the right thing for growing your firm.
No, absolutely. And then I think that the pull and tug, a lot of people tightened, especially when intake fell. We're seeing it in most of the markets that we've touched, whether Price Benowitz or Blue Shark, that volume is back up. May not be 100%, but it's not down in the dumps anymore. And that bringing it's going to be an opportunity to restaff and build up the intake department. And I think there's nobody better than Gary Falkowitz to help us figure out how to work with that team most effectively.
Awesome. So why don't we add Gary to the call and we can take it from there?
Absolutely. We are so lucky today to have Gary Falkowitz with us on the show. Gary, one of my favorite people in the legal space, an expert in intake and conversion, cut his teeth at Parker Wakeman, was the face of Parker Wakeman, figured out how to do intake on a large scale, morphed into a consultant, and now with ICE, he now is able to help people with that 360, the whole figuring out how do you get from phone call to signed contract. So to me, one of the hardest things to do well in the legal space, I've struggled with it for years. Gary, my question for you this morning, I'd love you to help us with, is I know you know how to do intake. Jay and myself personally can do intake. Scaling of intake, much, much more difficult. So you get a call, great. Your deputy gets a call, great. But as you build, that's the $1 million question. Help us out.
Yeah. Hey, Seth. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining. It's interesting, Seth, because as we all start our own practices, there's a lot of pride in wanting to handle that intake call yourself, because we all come from this perspective of, you get me in that living room, I'm going to get that thing signed, right? We have that confidence. We have that ego to a degree. And that's all and great. That's all well and great, except when you grow and you start to have other responsibilities, you need to start shifting the intake responsibility, that sales position, to somebody else, and sometimes to a team of others. And what you have to be able to do is, there's a few things. There's no here's the sentence, apply the sentence, you're good. The few things that stick out for me is you have to train your staff to understand what's necessary in that conversation, what's necessary on that call or in that meeting. They have to understand that this is not, what I realized early on in my career was there is this entitled personality trait that was really one that was going to hurt you. And what I mean is that if you take the position, well, this claimant called me, so obviously he wants my services, and I can put anybody on this call and I'll get this thing signed. You take that position, not only is it tremendously risky, but the chances of you winning are really low. And you need to make sure that your team, just like you did when you were picking up that call 15 years ago on a Friday night at 9:30, even though you were out to dinner with your spouse, you realize, hey, this is a new case. I need this case. I'm desperate for this case. This is how I'm going to grow. Your team has to take that same personality trait that if I don't respond immediately, if I'm not showing them interest that they're looking for, if I'm not able to tell them whether they qualify or not, if I can't do some of those things on this call, I'm likely going to lose that case to another law firm. And that's where it really starts, training them to have the same mentality that you had when you were a young attorney starting your own law firm.
I'm going to go granular because I love you speaking. You've inspired me. You've helped me in a lot of different ways hearing your thoughts on intake. But I'm going to try to give people some actual takeaways. Your opinion, again, I know there could be depends. Scripted fully versus talking points. Where do you fall on that?
In the middle. You got to have scripts. Your staff needs to be comfortable with what they're trying to get out on that conversation. And for a new intake specialist, if that's the title you're going to give to them, they have to be able to read that 20 times. So the 21st time, they're not reading anymore, and they can rephrase it in their own jargon so it comes across as a lot more comfortable. But they need scripting. They also need scripting for what qualifies, right? All too often, and since I tend to, and I apologize, I tend to go off on tangents because I remind myself of something important that I wanted to bring up. All too often, law firms are trying to investigate cases at the intake stage, and they give their staff, and I only bring this up because we talked about scripting, they give their staff 25 or 30 or 35 questions to ask. Now, if you're a new claimant and you speak with 3 law firms, and one of them can tell you in 7 questions that you qualify, this is how you become a client, and this is how we're going to start working for you. And another law firm says, okay, I'm just going to take a half hour of your time, and I'm going to ask you some really detailed questions, some of which you don't even have an answer to, and you're not going to have an answer to. That's going to intimidate me, nor am I going to have the time to give you to answer those questions. So if we can somehow, as an industry, and wait for the investigation till after retention, and keep that script, as you were talking to, very simple, to the point, qualified or not, contact information and a little bit of gathering information, and move on, we're going to win more than we lose. So to answer your question, yes, scripting is required, but that personality, if you're going to look for, people, Gary, who's the best type of person to hire? What's their experience? Sales position? Is it a customer service position? The answer is yes, 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 yes. It's all of that. But at the end of the day, they better have a great personality, but they better be warm on the telephone, right?
Yeah. Agreed. And that morphs into my next question, which is the difference between going for somebody that I've historically done, what your opinion, of a young recent grad who you expect to turn over every 2 years versus a lifer that you might gain consistency for, probably have to pay a few shekels more. What's your thought on that? You've been private practice, you've consulted with dozens of organizations, you now have your own group. Where do you fall for a law firm?
Yeah. So I will, from my experience, this is a very tough lifer position. People burn out pretty quickly. Are there exceptions to that? Of course there are. And I've seen those exceptions, and they're wonderful people and very talented and very patient also. I see this, unfortunately, as a revolving door, or fortunately, depending upon what you're looking for. It's a revolving door position. And here's why. Here are a few reasons why. One is people are going to get tired of that position. They're going to get tired of doing the same thing, speaking with people who are in a really difficult situation all the time, and sort of living that Groundhog's Day like we've all been doing over the last couple of months. Also, people want growth opportunities within a business. So now, is there a growth opportunity for an intake specialist in a law firm? Of course there is. It could become a supervisor. It could become a manager. It could become a paralegal, he or she, not it. But they could certainly grow within the firm. But there are only so many spots that intake specialist is going to grow into. So I think we have to be comfortable with that the ad posting, the interviewing, the hiring, that's a constant at intake. And what also is a constant is understanding whether you have some team members who might be wonderful people, but may not be great intake specialists, understanding that early so that you can move them potentially into a position where they will excel, because not everybody excels at the intake position.
And along those lines, training. It's one of those things that as we've expanded, we have multiple practice groups. Some people do, some people don't. Any pointers that would help? We played around with Trainual, but it is a very laborious process. You talk about scripts, that's great. I almost look at like a flight attendant. You ever see a flight attendant on their first flight? They're reading by the time they're a veteran, they know the safety announcements without even looking at the script. But as far as training, how do you get that learning curve, at least not to be something that costs exponentially every time you bring a new person on?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is hand-holding. This is not a position you throw right into the fire. You have to make sure someone is by their side on the first day that they're hired. And frankly, for the next couple, whether it's next week, next couple weeks, next month, that's up to you, depending upon how complicated your intake is, how complicated your case types are, how complicated your criteria is. But there needs to be that accountability and management early on so that they understand, not so much so that you could punish them or reward them, but more so that they understand what's expected of them, right? I think, and this is an intake point as well as a life point, I think anyone's ability to manage expectations makes you a very advantageous person to work with. And what I mean by that is when we speak with a new claimant and they call up, what I'm trying to get our staff and staff at other law firms to do is to let that claimant know how this phone call is going to go. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask for your contact information. Then I'm going to ask you some questions to see if you qualify. And if you qualify, I'm going to tell you how you can become a client. Now I told them exactly how the next 10-minute or 15, 20-minute call is going to go, and they're prepared for that. The same thing goes for an intake specialist. You want to manage their expectations. Okay, so we're going to get these calls. And a lot of times you're going to hear these questions. Here are the answers to these questions. There's going to be some downtime. Here's what I want you to do during the downtime. I'm going to have you listen to your calls. So you talked about training for a moment. You cannot have training. You cannot have a maximized intake staff without those calls being listened to and then being critiqued with that intake specialist. It is so important that they hear what they're saying.
Jay, I don't know if you want to jump in, but my final sort of thought for you here is, one of the things that I have struggled with is the sort of opportunity costs and time. Much of your world is the plaintiff's practice. Jay and I have, deal with intakes on both sides. My question to you is, you get something, and it'd be great if every call could be 30 minutes, but you would need an infit staff. And as you grow, you end up with a 20th worst person. So while I love adding labor to intake to be able to provide more time, each call needs to be looked at and measured in a way to determine, is it worth it? Yes, could you get a client who loves your intake so much they come back for a subsequent case? What's your feeling on sort of reeling them in so that they're not, everything is not a 5-star piece, but okay, you've realized there's no liability in this case. That call doesn't get as much time as the 5-star case. Talk to us a little bit about how you get third parties that aren't you to buy into that.
Yeah. So some of that is going full circle on what I said a few moments ago, Seth, and that's understanding that you have to be comfortable with signing cases that are not going to resolve in a fee. right? You have to be comfortable with having a new intake specialist, giving them the criteria that is 5 factors long, right? You want to go auto accident? Did it happen within the last year? Was it someone else's fault? Was there medical treatment, right? For some people, that's enough. That's enough. Get that thing signed and then figure out after the fact whether it was worth signing or whether you have to change some questions. I'd rather, if I were starting with a law firm that had resources, they had money to spend on marketing and they had money to create intake staff internally. But they're not sure, oh, Gary, but what's my perfect criteria? How do I know what case to sign? I would say start really loose. Sign more cases and then start tightening up when you realize that a large percentage of the cases that you're signing are being thrown back out or being rejected after the fact. So that's the biggest issue. I think law firms are leaving way too much money on the table because they're nervous about signing cases that may not resolve in a fee for them. And
there's logical reasons on that. There are bad reviews that come when you drop people. There's bad ill will. So it's not like but I agree, pushing further. One of those things along those lines, though, is when it's not a case, you've gone through your criteria. I almost feel it's an art of how do you get off the phone without being an a-hole, or not feeling badly about yourself or alienating that person. Any tips for people of how to end a conversation when you know that it's not going to be a case in a time-effective way?
Yeah. So the truth shall set you free, right? If you're disqualifying a case, if your claimants are disqualifying a case, your intake staff know why it's being disqualified. Let's tell the claimant, Mrs. Jones, unfortunately, the law firm is only handling cases where the police report states that the accident was caused by somebody else. I understand that you believe it was their fault and the police report saying it's your fault. I don't have much wiggle room with that. So I'm really sorry, but what I will do is take your contact information out, take your contact information down and share your situation with our legal team. And if they have any follow-up questions, I'm going to make sure someone reaches back out to you. But right now for us, we have to keep it very simple about whether it's worth a case that we can retain or it's not. We don't want to waste your time. So let's tell them why. Let's explain why, this is not a case we can help. And by the way, remind them just because we can't help you doesn't mean someone else can't help you. So don't just give up. It's just those are the circumstances that we have to work under. And I think it's better to go down that truthful way than it is to say, okay, well, we'll think about it and we'll get back in touch. And we never get back in touch with them. And now they're getting angry and those bad reviews are what you're referring to.
But that also is a struggle because you're saying no to people. And that's not an easy thing for people to do. It takes a wear and tear on the staff. And that hard no is, leads to confrontation on the call, which can escalate to worse things. And it's a balance. I've struggled with it myself. Truth will set you free. At the same time, the truth will also get you into a back and forth with somebody who's just unhappy with the world and you're their 7th rejection. I like the idea that there's a tail that we will see what we could do or try to refer something on. So almost like a job rejection will keep your resume on file. You're not going to explode as much because there's a chance in the future rather than like I'm shutting the door and there's no chance in hell.
That's exactly right. And I think, you go back to those junior high school and high school days where you got rejected and the other party said, it's not you, it's me. Right. So we've got to explain that it's not them, it's us. We're only handling certain types of cases. And Mrs. Jones, as you know, we only get paid if we're successful. So we have to be careful about, which cases we're retaining. We also want to manage your expectations. The last thing we want to do is sign you up and then reject you in 3 or 6 months and upset you. We already know right now that unfortunately it doesn't meet this criteria. However, I want to get your information down. Every case is reviewed by an attorney in my firm, and I want them to review your case as well in case something changes.
Okay, this is awesome. Jay, you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, I have a question for Gary. One of the things that a lot of people that I have found in the legal space look for in their intake team is people who worked in the service industry. So waiters, bartenders, that type of thing. But even, I worked in that industry myself. I know Seth did too. Even people in that industry, there are wait staff and bartenders who could be working at the same restaurant and one makes a lot more money than the other one does, right? So is there not a perfect intake person, but are there qualifications that you look for when you're interviewing people to identify people who have the greatest possibility for success in an intake position? Are there certain career choices? Are there backgrounds? What is it about somebody that can set them up for success as an intake person so our listeners can identify those people early in the process?
Yeah, it's a good question. Thanks, Jay. So let's start. Rather than giving you the ideal background, what I'm going to tell you is things that stand out when I look at applications or people we're potentially hiring or people that we have hired. Their understanding of the firm and what the legal, what this position, what an intake, what the law firm is trying to do, who they help, why they help these people, how they get paid. Their understanding of that whole thing is a leg up on the competition, because you could be the most amazing, have the most amazing personality, be the best salesperson, but you have no idea what you're selling and you have no idea what you're offering. It's going to leave you limited. So first and foremost, I want them to understand who we are. So if they have any legal experience, that's a plus for me. The next is I want them to understand that it's not necessarily a salesy position, because these folks are already reaching out to you. They're already interested in you. To me, I look at it as a reassuring position. So if someone who makes someone feel better about themselves. So I always give this example because I'm the witness to it. I was a victim to it. When my phone broke, my iPhone broke 5-6 years ago. No one would take the responsibility, whether it was Verizon or Apple, and I wasted a lot of time. And when I say broke, I mean, like, I would go, once I left my house, my in-home Wi-Fi, and I went out, everything shut down. I couldn't make a call. I couldn't get text messages. I couldn't go internet. And I had businesses and family, I had a family. I couldn't not have a phone that works. So I'd call Verizon, I'd call Apple. Every time I called Apple and they put on a tech, that tech would look up my file and they would say, "Oh, I see you're dealing with ABC. We handle ABC all the time. We'll take care of this for you." Now, by the 12th call, I no longer believe them anymore. But for the first 11 calls, they allowed me to sit back for a half hour, tell them my whole story, and give them an opportunity to fix it for me, right? So if we let these folks know that, hey, we handle these types of cases, and they can reassure someone really well, then all of a sudden you're providing comfort to that claimant. Now, you asked, to get back to your question, like the resume, the positions. If you need people, you want to look for people who have experience working with other people, right? The salesy thing isn't as important to me, because the claimant is already calling and they're nervous. So I don't want someone to think that, oh my God, they're just trying to sell me. Because let's be honest here, guys, when it comes to at least the contingency fee aspect of things, no one believes it. Claimants do not believe that they only have to pay if the law firm's successful. They always think there's something written really tiny. It says, "Oh, and you owe $100,000," or "Oh, and you owe $100," and it's just not true. So if you try to sales pitch them, it's going to hurt. But if you create a relationship with them and you're compassionate with them and you're reassuring to them, and then you can teach conveying urgency, right? And being able to communicate interest. Now you win. Now you're in the best. And that's how I look at things. We're all sport guys. To me, it's a win or a lose. They come when they reach out to you, you have the power right there to win that case or to lose that case. And if they walk away, you lost. If you couldn't convince them to sign, you must have done something wrong. You didn't create a relationship. You aren't compassionate. You didn't tell them they qualify. Maybe they give them the opportunity to sign something while on the phone. But that's how I look at it, Jay. So it's more about, do the personalities of the people you're training, are they human to human experts? Are they really good at speaking with and being compassionate with others?
Yeah, one of the things that I do in my in-house training is when we have a new intake person, we'll actually go out to lunch on the very first day as an intake team. And when the waiter or waitress comes over and they say, "Are you ready to order?" I look at my intake person and say, "Look, they know we're here to eat. And so they're ready to take the order. They're not asking us, 'Hey, do you want to eat something today?' I mean, we're sitting at a table in their restaurant, and you have the same approach you have to take to people who call you as a lawyer. They're calling you because they know they need a lawyer. Your job is to make it easy for them to bring you in and put you on their team. That's the way we approach it.
I'll add one more aspect to that. Sometimes they're calling you because they think they need a lawyer and they need someone to tell them that they need a lawyer, right? So if you can do that, if you can tell them, "Yeah, Mrs. Jones, auto accident cases, we handle those every single day." Or, "Wait, you arrested for DWI? We are DWI experts. We help. We just resolved one yesterday." They need that reassurance that they called the right place, and they need the reassurance that they need what they had a hunch that they needed.
This is great stuff. On a personal level, I'd like to conclude that you did something very special. Not only have you been a great friend and somebody who I've looked up to in this space, but you had preached for many years listening to recordings. And I had always poo-pooed it because I was able to walk through and our managers walked through and heard one half of the conversation. I'm like, we're good. We got this amazing team. And we did. But over time, that team transitioned. I didn't have my original A team that I really put my own thumbprint on. And when we started listening, it was eye-opening. So, it's one of those things that very often it's not easy to do. It takes time, but making sure that someone in the team, and I have you to thank, because we would not be as good as we are today if we had not finally listened to your preaching, that was a game changer, because there was just only so much you hear from one side of the conversation.
I appreciate that. And Seth, the same goes the other way around. You've been an amazing leader in this industry. I appreciate everything you're doing for me and others. I'll say one thing with respect to the recording of the calls, which is be prepared. Unfortunately, every single call, both, and mine too, by the way, right? This one, if I could do this over, I probably would have said things a little bit differently. But every call can be improved upon. So be prepared and don't be too picky. Pick the bigger things. Let the small things flow.
Excellent.
Really appreciate it, Gary. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Gary. Really, really great having you on the show with us.
My pleasure, guys. Thank you for everything you're doing. I appreciate the invitation. And anytime you want to do it again, it'd be my pleasure.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Gary. We'll see you later. Bye.
Bye, guys.
And now we have our wonderful guest every week, Nalini Prasad. Nalini, so glad to have you back with us. We still have to come up with a name for this little segment. I like Shark Bites, but Nalini's Nuggets, we have to come up with something catchy for you so we can have a little graphic run across the screen. Do you have any suggestions?
The Nalini's Nugget was something that I thought was funny. I liked the Shark Bites. We're still thinking about it. I haven't gotten a lot of answers from people, so I need some more suggestions, and then I'll choose a winner, right?
Down there in the comments section, make sure you give Nalini some suggestions so we can drop a little graphic for it. But Nalini, I'm happy to say that this past weekend, after 10 weeks of being down, I finally got back into Google My Business after supplying them with all sorts of information, trade name certificate, a copy of my lease, just tons of stuff. So why don't we start off talking a little bit more about Google My Business and opening a secondary office, because that's something I want to do, but I'm a little gun shy. So tell us what your tips are for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked a little bit about this in prior episodes, but when you're looking at a new office space, especially right now, as we may find that this is the time to capitalize on a lot of office space coming available, we want to make sure that Google is going to approve this location. We want to make sure that there are certain items that we're looking at, such as make sure there's no one else in the office building that is a lawyer that is practicing the exact same type of practice as you, right? If you're a PI lawyer, it's fine if you got a family lawyer in the building. But if you have another PI lawyer in the building, Google's going to get confused and say, okay, there's two PI lawyers here. I have to choose one if I'm talking about proximity. And then you're going to get filtered out. And so it makes it a little difficult.
And to be clear, just, yes, absolutely. But it's not an absolute. So if you have a legacy player that's really not playing online and you are, yes, there's somebody else in your building, but it should be easy to trump them, versus if it's another person that you always are competing against or see regularly there, that's where you have to be really concerned. So yes, look for other people in the building, but it's other online players, not just like anybody who happens to practice your area of law.
Agreed. And some of these items that we are, that I would say to be careful of are also things that are going to go above and beyond, just to be completely in the clear. If Google changes some things down the road, you have played so safe that you're doing well, right? So like that would set. The other one would be something that Google looks at is if you're in a building, making sure that every single person, every single business in that building has a suite number. Now, that's not something that's 100% gonna affect it right now, but it does help Google be able to distinguish which business is which, right? So again, thinking a little bit further ahead, similarly to what Seth just said. You also want to make sure that you have a space that you can have your name, whether it's in the lobby on a directory or there's an outside storefront that you can have a signage that shows that you're there. All of these kind of items we put together in a one-pager, which I'm happy to share with folks. We had that one. And then we also went on and we said, okay, well, what if you get a location, you've done the checklist, everything's gone well, and then you still get suspended by Google? Sometimes there are glitches. Sometimes there's, it just, So Jay's been through it, right? He has a very legitimate business office. He's done everything right. But sometimes it can happen at the most inopportune moment right now, right? Sitting there for 10 weeks. So we created a second one-pager that also has what should you have handy? What should you have ready to give to Google in the event that your location is suspended? And even if you pass all the requirements with flying colors, it's still important to kind of have those things ready. Some of you may not have a lease agreement, right? That you've had a copy of sitting there and you'll have to go call somebody for it. But just to have it ready can save you days, if not weeks, of being without a Google My Business with your reviews. I guess, Jay, had a quick question too. When was the last time you actually sent Google all of the paperwork before they got back to you and actually let it go live again? What was that waiting?
So actually, it was kind of short. We uploaded everything on Friday, and Sunday morning, 6 a.m., we got the notification that we were back online. Now, interestingly, we were back online and no longer suspended, but we still haven't shown up in the 3-pack until today. So it took a little while for that information to reach all their data centers. Because, and I've been checking it just to sort of see where we're at. So it was great on Sunday. Hey, you're no longer suspended. I did a quick search and we're not showing up. And I kind of freaked out, but talked to somebody, said, hey, give it 72 hours. It'll pass through all the data centers and then you'll be back and be okay. And we're here now on Wednesday morning and we're good.
One thing I hope that happens for you that I've seen is that when it's something that's random, a competitor tried to ding you. We saw that in the DC market at one point. We've had other people with brick and mortar places there for years. When something comes back that really never should have been dinged, it wasn't like it was a spammy listing you somehow convinced them to put back, that when they're legit and you've paid, you've done your hard work, we've seen some of those come back better than ever. And that's the best part. That, you might have been in the 3-pack, bottom of it. We've seen movement upwards when those come back, because Google's like, wow, it's almost like a fresh set of eyes.
Yeah.
We need this. This is the right answer for what we want. And it wasn't there before. And that's been really cool to see.
And I think that's absolutely true. And they're also like, oops, sorry, you guys are very legitimate. I really think that that's a good thing to discuss, that this came back in such a short period of time. Because I think that also tells us, Google had said they're going to start having people work from home. Support should be back in June. We're at June 3rd, and it's sounding like even from our end, we're seeing a lot more responses happening, not as quick as 24 hours, like when they are working at full capacity. But it's getting better in terms of if you need to make changes to your Google My Business, now might be a good time to try to put those changes through and see how long it takes you. Give us feedback. Let us know. Has it taken a week to hear back from people? I would love to know the different regions of the country and how Google Support's handling you guys. But that's a really positive thing to see right now.
So if people are in different parts of the country and they've been getting some support from Google, why don't they post down below in the comment section and tell us about their experiences with Google support? That way we have some data that we can share next week on our next show. I do have a question for you, along these same veins, and I didn't prep you for it, but I want to throw this out to the two of you. I've heard different schools of thought when it comes to having Google My Business listings for the firm and for individual attorneys in the firm. And what is your guys' position? Should my firm have a listing and then I also have a listing along with all the lawyers in my office? Or should we just focus on the firm listing? What is your opinion on that?
Well, to be fair, we instead of watching Netflix, we very often discuss this late night. This is how we spend our evenings.
Boy, I thought I was a dork.
Yeah. So
that's a masterpiece. So for
most people, where you have one area of practice, the firm listing is fine. Don't confuse Google with anything else. We've seen the downside of a confusion where you have multiple people under it for a consumer-facing practice. Generally, we advocate for that. The place where we see the sub listing, the practitioner profile, having an effect, and I don't want to say it's without controversy, and Nalini can speak more to that about whether or not that is something Google wants for the foreseeable future, but that it allows you to pivot to a second area of law from the same website. We don't have enough time to talk about it today. We can bring this up next week, but when you have a single website trying to accomplish two things, that practitioner profile can be valuable because that person can have a different primary area of law, which allows for it to stick and have a viable chance in the 3-pack. That said, right now for most people listening, the main firm profile can do the trick. The only reason you want those subcategories, because if you're in the same office, in theory, based on today's methodology, you're going to get filtered out anyway. So put all your eggs in the firm basket for now, unless there's a business imperative not to. Nalini?
Yeah, and I agree. You said, is this something they want for right now or the future? And if you guys actually look up practitioner profile, that is the correct term for it that Google uses, you'll see that they have been doing a little bit of work on it through these algorithmic updates that we've seen recently, where they're saying, hey, we're trying to maybe get rid of these if possible, but they also understand the importance of them. If you have multiple practice areas, they want you to be able to optimize for that, like Seth said. This is a great topic and something that I think is going to be trending in the next couple of weeks, and it's something that I do think we can touch on next week in terms of, you guys are seeing all this new office space that you can capitalize on, but also we see a lot of people who are saying, maybe I can pivot into bankruptcy, maybe I can pivot into trust and estates, when you're really, a criminal or a PI lawyer. And so what can you do? What is the best case? What's the best practice for that? Should you put it on your site, on another site? That's a great topic for next week for people to join in. It sounds
like next week, Nalini, we need to have you on for a little longer. So maybe next week we can budget for, a 15, 20-minute conversation where we can really drill down into this, because I know your time is limited today. So I want to thank you for that. And why don't we talk about that, Seth? I think it'd be important for us to have Nalini for a little longer segment next week as we start to talk about practice pivots and how to establish yourself in a practice pivot situation.
Absolutely.
What I'd love to see is just people put your questions for next week. Now you know what we're going to talk about. Give us the questions that you have, and we'll address them all next week.
Right down below in the comment section, folks. All right, great, Nalini. Thanks so much for being with us this week. We look forward to that long talk next week.
Yeah, sharp shirt, Jay. Thanks.
All right, Seth, so that's going to end this week's show of Maximum Growth Live. As always, great stuff from Gary, great stuff from Nalini. And I think, especially next week, there's a lot of good stuff that we can talk about with Nalini. So I'm really excited to start working, when we get off this call, start planning out next week's questions, because I think it's going to be some great stuff for our audience.
Absolutely. Look forward to it, Jay.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, guys. That's going to end it for us today here on Maximum Growth Live. Thanks so much for being with us, and we'll see you next week, next Thursday, 3 p.m. Eastern here on Maximum Growth Live. Take care. Bye for now.